now is the major mistake that a lot of people made on the exam, which is when we talk about all of the factors that go into calories out and all of the factors that go into calories in. Calories in, you guys did a pretty good job because you're like, it's all the macronutrients you take in. The calories out part of the equation, remember, we've got not just the thermic effect of food, exercise, and resting metabolic rate, but we also have non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT. So those four factors. And then the second part of that question is what got a lot of you guys, which is when you lose weight, your resting metabolic rate goes down because you're literally a smaller person. Your exercise energy expenditure can potentially go down because now you have a smaller body. Your non-exercise activity thermogenesis typically also will go down, especially if you're in a calorie deficit. And then the thermic effect of food, if you're eating less calories, and specifically protein that has a major thermic effect, you're going to burn less calories. So all of those literally make it harder and harder to lose weight as you're going down. Now, the opposite is true when you're trying to gain weight, because your resting metabolic rate goes up because you now have a bigger body. Your exercise energy expenditure, if you're doing the same amount of exercise, goes up because you are literally moving a heavier body around. If you're doing a big caloric surplus, you can find yourself with not an increased non-exercise activity thermogenesis, like you're just a little more jittery, just kind of like tapping your feet and bounce here because you've just simply are in a caloric surplus. And then obviously the thermic effect of food can be higher because you're taking in more calories. So all of those is what caused the resistance, so to speak. How you have that real fast initial drop and then a slower drop, and then eventually people just seem to get stuck in their weight loss. And then same thing with weight gain, and then they stick. The issue with it is all of those components are effectively working against them. And so you don't want to go too hard too fast, because that's when you really see that drastic drop in resting metabolic rate, that drastic drop in non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So that was the major thing that the most people messed up. Otherwise, it's kind of hit or miss. Some folks kind of had a couple mistakes in the digestive tract. Some folks had a couple mistakes when they were talking about, what's going on with essentiality and otherwise, but otherwise it's pretty good. So if you guys don't have any more questions, then we're going to go ahead and start talking about the wonders of carbs. And no, butter is not a carb. Now, when I make that statement, do all of you guys know what that's a reference to? Oh boy. So I am now old enough that you guys have never seen the movie Mean Girls. I knew this day would come. So carbs are a great energy source, specifically whenever we're talking about doing moderate to high intensity exercise. And we're going to store them in the forms of glycogen, mostly in our muscles, but a little bit in our liver. Now, the advantage of muscle glycogen is it's right there in the muscle fiber, rapidly able to be used. The problem is it's in that individual fiber, which means if we're not using that muscle fiber, we're not using those carbs. And if it's other fibers that need those carbs, they can't really readily free them up and move them. Now, liver glycogen is nice because it's available to be put into circulation, and then it can go anywhere we want to in the body. And we're constantly trying to regulate our blood glucose level. And we're going to get into some of the issues with high blood sugar at the very end today. But effectively, too high of blood sugar is super bad, because then we start to get glycosylation of structures that we don't want, and glycosylation of proteins, which it literally can cause eventually neuropathy, and that's where we talk about uncontrolled diabetes and potentially death. Now, the other side is we have too low blood sugar. Well, your red blood cells don't have an actual mitochondria, so the only way that they can use energy is, or the only way they can break down anything for energy is using anaerobic glycolysis. In your brain and nervous system thoroughly enjoy using carbohydrates as fuel. You can also use ketone bodies, but they're just not as efficient. And so we're constantly trying to keep our blood glucose typically between 70 and 100 milliliters or milligrams per deciliter. And depending on obviously what's going on with our meal, those levels can be higher. We're going to use insulin to bring it down and glucagon to raise it back up. Now, on the bottom left, that's just kind of to give you an idea of how we've got the carbs from our nutrition. We've got the carbs from our liver that we'll put in the blood. And then from there, it can be taken up into the muscles that we're specifically using. Now, In the muscles, we have an enzyme known as hexokinase. That's that first step in glycolysis. It puts a phosphate on the glucose, and once that happens, that glucose can't leave. We don't have the exact same type of enzyme in the liver. That one is called glucokinase, and effectively it's bidirectional. So effectively, it's what allows that glucose to leave. And also, it doesn't get activated until blood sugar levels are 4 times higher inside the cell than when they're activated inside of a muscle cell, which again is a good thing, because that means when we're taking in carbohydrates, our muscles are going to top themselves off with glucose first, and then our liver is going to work on filling itself up. So it's just important to keep in mind, it's going to take a little time. The two are important, but they work at different rates. Now, how fast we're going to decrease our our muscle glycogen levels comes down to exercise intensity. So notice the graph on the upper right. So the percentages is percent of VO2 max, which, yes, I know 150% of your VO2 max sounds insane, because it is. Just like 120% of your max. But this could be doing like an incredibly just kick you in the teeth hard anaerobic HIIT workout where you can massively decrease glycogen levels. And the problem is when the glycogen levels go lower, we can't use anaerobic glycolysis as well. So hence, we want to make sure we're topping these levels off as best we can in between workouts, and we're just being mindful of what's going on with our nutrition. Now, what we have on the bottom right is going to be that glucose output. So how quickly we're going to free up glucose from the liver, depending on how long we're exercising. And obviously, the higher your exercise intensity, the faster we're going to free it. And like anything else, it has a finite supply. And we're really talking about typically at a really high intensity, you can probably only hold on using glycogen for about up to 2 hours if you really time it right. And we'll get into some of those strategies in a little bit. Any questions so far? Okay. How many of you guys are familiar with the glucose index? Who has heard of the glucose index before? Okay, so Jake or Abby, go ahead and just explain it based upon how you understand it.
So basically the way I understand it is how basically in certain foods, how fast it takes to get into your bloodstream and enter your muscles.
Good, good. That's a good, simple way to think about it. And it's not necessarily into your muscles, it's into your bloodstream. So now for you and other people that are physically active, your statement about getting in your muscles is pretty accurate. Now for Homer Simpson, now we're really talking about how quickly it's in his bloodstream, and maybe it's going to muscle, probably getting converted into fat, and then also making his pancreas work a lot harder. So the way to think about this glucose index, guys, is the faster it goes into your bloodstream, the more rapidly we are digesting it, the faster we're going to cause the rise in blood sugar. So obviously we haven't gotten more into kind of the minutia here, but if we're going to try and effectively get in that glucose, when do you think you really want to try to get in that glucose as quickly as possible into your cells?
I would say, oh, I thought I was muted.
No, you're good. We can hear you, Jake.
Probably, I would say like 30 or 45 minutes before like a high intensity workout, or like right after a workout.
Okay. So it's going to be both during and right after. The reason we don't want to go super high GI carbs at the time you're talking about is a really interesting phenomena that actually works against you. If you do a high GI carb at about from 1 hour to about 20 minutes before your actual competition, what's going to happen is that those carbs are going to go in your bloodstream. Your pancreas is going to start to release insulin. And that release of insulin is actually going to cause your blood sugar to come down, but then you start exercising and that causes your blood sugar to really shoot down. So you actually are going to fatigue out far faster than you would because of low blood sugar. So if you want to do a high GI carb, right, like pretty much you're sipping on it right when you're getting warmed up before you go, during your workout, during your competition, whatever is allowed, and then immediately post-workout. So I have friends that literally their post-workout nutrition is Fruity Pebbles with like a protein shake because it's pretty much straight sugar. Now, when we add fiber, when we add fat, and not necessarily if we add protein, all of those are going to cause these carbs to be more slowly digested. So when do you guys think we want to get in more of those low GI carbohydrates, the ones that are much slower digested, brought into the bloodstream at a slower rate? You could do it as like your last meal before exercise as a means to kind of top off those muscle glycogen and liver glycogen levels. Absolutely, Abby. But so think about the flaws of the typical American diet, especially as we are giving them typically to children. What's usually breakfast for a child?
Cereal.
Good. So straight sugar or Pop-Tarts, straight sugar. What's the problem with giving them a high GI carb for breakfast?
If it's that they're eating sugar and then having a high carb, but they're going to have a lot of energy, they're going to have to run off.
Not necessarily that energy they're going to run off, but they're going to effectively be riding a roller coaster of their blood sugar levels throughout the day. So you want that lower GI carb or even that moderate GI carb. That's what you're doing for lunch. That's what you're doing for breakfast. That's what you're doing for lunch. That's what you're doing for dinner. Something that's a little bit more slowly digested, A, because it's going to make you feel fuller longer, but B, because obviously it's going to take longer for it to get into your system, which means that you're going to have a little bit more of an even blood sugar level. Since this is America and type 2 diabetes is a real problem. So we don't want to try to spike blood sugar in everyone all the time. Now, for your hard training athletes, immediately post-workout and during workout, oh yeah, let's bring the sugar on. Oh, also one of my friends, his post-workout was a bag of M&Ms or a bag of chocolate chips or a bag of Skittles. He really just liked doing post-workouts out of bags. It made it very simple for him. But that way, the rest of the time, yeah, you're eating something more like an oatmeal. You're eating something like actual fruit. You're eating something like essentially, whole wheat or whole wheat options or legumes otherwise that are giving you the carbs you need, but you're not getting those spikes in blood sugar and back down, spike and back down, spike and back down. Instead, you're trying to keep yourself more even keel throughout your day. So does the glucose index make sense, guys, and how we're going to try and apply it? Awesome. Thank you guys for voting. Now, depending on what we're doing, we're going to, on occasion, worry about loading carbohydrates. So here is the thing. If you are a weightlifter, if you are a shot putter, if you are a baseball player, it's highly unlikely what's going to ever hold you back is your carbohydrate intake, eating a normal American diet. Now, is this a possibility if you're a long distance runner, especially a marathoner, a triathlete, an ultramarathoner? Absolutely. So notice, guys, in the bottom left, now this is old work from Dave Costel's lab. It's out of Ball State in 71, where you can see, notice that's 16.1 kilometers, which if we convert that over into American, you're talking about running about, yeah, getting close to 10 miles, okay? So 10-mile runs back to back to back. Notice it's literally doing with only 1 day break in between. The group with a high carb diet tended to maintain their glycogen levels. The group with a low carb diet, it seemed to fall off. Now, are a lot of your athletes going to run 10 miles a day? No. But you are going to have some cross-country athletes that are doing crazy volumes. You're going to have some soccer players that are doing a lot of work. You're going to have some basketball players that are doing a lot of work. So we have to make sure with our carbohydrate intake that we are getting enough in them, that we're replenishing that glycogen before their next major workout. So if you're looking over at the right, and it's glycogen synthesis rate relative to control, taking in carbs in general at a higher rate, notice it gets you a faster replenishment of glycogen. Notice that's 1.2 grams per kilogram of body mass per hour. And adding a little bit of protein enhances it a little bit more, but your key factor for really replenishing carbs is getting enough carbs. And then on the bottom right, this is an example from soccer. Notice whenever these athletes were doing a full game, look at how low effectively their glycogen was inside of their cells by the end of the games. So notice they were running in the high carb group. We're talking about 12 kilometers. So you're talking about 8 or 9 miles, and notice a quarter of that was sprinting. And then even with a normal diet, we're still talking about running almost 10K and not as much sprinting and a lot more walking. So since soccer is a really stop and go sport, it's much more inefficient and use a lot more carbohydrates anaerobically, which means you literally burn through them faster. So hence, if you're an athlete that uses that anaerobic or aerobic glycolytic systems, we have to make sure we're replenishing those carbs. Any questions here? Awesome. So there's 2 different ways that you can go and really try to optimize carbohydrates before a competition. And that's going to allow you to have super compensation. So you have way, way more muscle glycogen than normal, which is going to really help you through. Now, there's 2 different options. One of them is incredibly painful. The other is very friendly. So the first option, you do a super low carbohydrate diet and a very fatiguing exercise or workout 7 days before your competition. You do another one 4 days before your competition to effectively try to decimate all of your intramuscular glycogen stores. And then you go super high carb diet for the next 3 days out, and then the day of the competition to allow for really high glycogen levels. So you're going to, in theory, be able to go longer before you deplete them. This is the type of protocol that you would use, either of these, for like a long distance runner. But do you guys really want to have to go through the super fatiguing protocol and the low carb diet for all of those days before the competition? Because you're going to feel like garbage. You're going to be exhausted. How many of you guys would actually like to give that a shot?
I wouldn't like it.
I like the thumbs down use there, Courtney, and agree, Jake. I've used this method a number of times. The advantage to this, and you even go even closer to your competition, is by depleting glycogen, because for every gram of carbohydrate you store about 2.4 grams of water with it. So if you can drop effectively 500 grams of carbohydrate, muscle glycogen, and liver glycogen, you can effectively lose another 1.1 or about 1.2 kilograms of water, which means altogether you're going to net yourself 3 pounds off your body. And for people my size, it's even more than that to decarb so you can make weight for a competition. But it's miserable. Now, the other option is slowly increase your carbohydrate intake while you're slowly tapering back and decreasing. Yeah, it is miserable, Zach. Decreasing your decreasing your total training volume. So not only is it feeling better because you're doing less and less work, but you're also getting taken in more and more carbs. So you're going to really hit that peak. This is the friendly way to go about it. And this is the one that I would thoroughly suggest for every athlete that is peaking for a competition that doesn't have to make weight. Because if you don't have to make weight, you can be as heavy as you want to be, especially if that extra weight is thanks to holding more glycogen, which in turn is going to pull in more water, but it's going to give you an advantage in your actual sport. Now, when it comes to the carbohydrate intake in natural practice, yeah, we want to make sure that we're never giving so much that we're getting GI distress and or taking away from the performance. Usually it ends up being about 60 grams of glucose an hour and about 30 grams of fructose on top if you want to do that. If you're feeling spicy, you can even throw some actual lactate salts on there because that's a carbohydrate, but it turns out it's got a lot of negative press, even though it's just a fuel source. Now, as far as the recommendations, they're usually done in grams per kilogram of body mass, usually recommended about 3 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass per day. And if you're up to doing like Tour de France, triathlon, like crazy long distances, that recommendation can be actually, I've seen up to 12 grams per kilogram of body mass. So just so we're clear, somebody my size would be taking in, like literally would be over 2.2 pounds of pure carbohydrate, which sounds awful. But when you're doing this type of workloads, you just literally need to increase your caloric intake. Now, you have a question, Jake?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay.
I forgot to mute myself.
No, you're okay, bud. So before exercise, and I'm glad that Jake actually brought this up earlier, if we really do those high GI carbs 30 to 60 minutes out, we're actually going to crash our blood sugar. So instead, we want to focus on that low GI carb pre-workout. Now, notice this graph over here, guys, and this is the carbohydrate ingestion rate, so literally how many carbs you're putting in the mouth hole, and then the actual oxidation rate, so how much carbs are we actually getting and breaking down. And it really seems to be limited about 1.2 to 1.1 grams per minute. So we can take in more than that because it'll just sit in our GI and slowly be broken down, but we're not going to be able to get any more of that into our actual bloodstream. So when you're looking to really try to get a higher performance, yes, we can do higher amounts of not just the glucose, but glucose with fructose is going to give us the best amount of oral carbohydrate when we're going. However, we're still limited on how many we can break down. And if you do too many, now we're talking about GI distress because it's just sitting in your stomach. You can't get it in. Now, 3 to 5 minutes before exercise should probably be your last big meal if you're really talking about doing a hard competition or anything else. Now, what's the major issue with saying that we're not going to, our last big meal for athletes should be 3 to 5 hours before exercise?
You would be hungry by the time it's competition.
You could be, but it'd be better to have an empty stomach going into a competition than a full one.
Yeah.
Instead, notice it says exercise. So let's not think of it as competition because, no offense, when you say competition, you think of baseball. Where baseball, you typically play in the afternoons or evenings.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, Sam, what time do you guys have weights right now?
6 and 7
AM or PM?
a.m.
So if you have 6 a.m. weights, do you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning so you have your last carbohydrate meal?
No.
Why not? Do you not care about your health and athletic performance?
For one, I'm too tired.
Yeah, because that 3 hours of sleep is probably better than the getting in that last meal. So therein lies one of the issues. Like anything else, is think about how we're going to apply this with a real athlete. So if, King for Day in charge of you guys, I would be like, just try to eat a piece of fruit, or, actually maybe even eat a freaking Pop-Tart while you're walking over to your morning workout. It's not optimal, but at least you're getting some carbohydrates in, you're getting some calories in, and that's probably going to help your performance, as opposed to going in there just empty after sleeping for however many hours. Does that make sense to you guys? Awesome. So during exercise, we can only break down so many grams of carbohydrate per minute. It's just a simple reality. So we're talking about that, 60 odd grams of glucose, 30 odd grams of fructose. It's going to scale up and down a little bit with the type of athlete or with the size of the athlete. Now, the type of carbohydrate, the simpler the better. Now, there are certain things like UCAN has Vitargo, which is a slow digesting starch that's been used in the NFL and a couple other groups that they seem to, a lot of people are proponents of for kind of helping maintain blood sugar levels and performance. And those can be absolutely fine. Honestly, your simple sugars are going to work just as well. The key is you don't just chug it all at once. You drink it slowly as you're going throughout your training practice game, whatever availability you have. Now, obviously, distance athletes are going to use things like drinks, gels, energy bars in order to keep up performance. That's absolutely fine. The key is figure out what people can tolerate, because obviously as that exercise intensity ticks up, it becomes harder and harder to digest carbohydrates because we've got less blood going to our GI, and it literally becomes harder to try and eat or just digest carbs while you're going. So we're going to have limitations simply on blood flow going through the system, how many transporters, if you guys remember, for getting those carbs in our system. Remember how we needed sodium to help glucose and galactose in through their transporter. Fructose has its own transporter. That's why we can take in more of it independently, but we're still only going to be able to do so much. And like anything else, if we're taking in more carbohydrate, we're going to be utilizing carbs more preferentially as a fuel. That's okay. That's kind of the goal here. And in fact, there's some athletes that are ketogenic, so they go that low carb lifestyle, but they actually supplement with carbohydrates when they're actually training as a means to increase their workout performance while still allowing them to maintain their low carb lifestyle. It's more difficult, but it is something that is feasible. So once we get done with exercise, that's when it's time to really take in massive amounts of carbohydrates. So if you look at the wonderful figure on your right, remember exercise is going to cause those GLUT4 receptors to move up to the cellular surface, which is going to allow carbs to come in, as is insulin. And then once it's inside, then it's going to be converted into, in this example, glycogen. This is a good thing. This happens very quickly. So if you look at the table on the bottom, notice the difference between doing those carbs immediately post-workout as opposed to not getting in those carbs until we're 2 hours post-exercise. You're missing the rapid phase of glycogen resynthesis. Now, you can still get glycogen resynthesis. It's just going to happen slower. And depending on how many workouts you have to do, how many bouts you have to do, that's going to be limiting in obviously how much carbs we can go ahead and get you to get in. And still it comes down to about that 1.2 odd grams per minute of how much we're actually going to be able to get back inside of us. So like anything else, we want to try to get those carbs within 2 hours post-workout. We want to use carbs that are relatively quickly digested. So that's the high GI carb time. Okay. And if we use a little bit of protein, it seems to help a little bit with glycogen resynthesis, not massively, but potentially. And when in doubt, a liquid form is just much more quickly digested and taken down. So it tends to be a better option to go and use. So question we have from Blaine: how would carbs after exercise change for someone competing in a tournament? What type of carbs would be optimal, since post-exercise carbs would also be pre-exercise carbs? So anything you do with all of these ideas in this class, you first need to test drive them on your athlete. Don't try this stuff the first time at an actual competition, because who knows, maybe that's when you could figure out they have some type of horrible reaction to Gatorade or orange juice or fruit punch, whatever works for them. But my thought would be to pick some type of preferably liquid carbohydrate. Fruit juice is a good, simple choice. It's relatively inexpensive. Obviously, there's a lot of sport drink beverages that are also going to have electrolytes, which are, advantageous depending on how much sweating they're doing. So my thought would be is figure out what they like. It's the good old like orange slices at halftime for those of you guys that grew up playing soccer. You can go ahead and give them a myriad of different carbs. The key is should definitely be fast digesting, and it should be something easier on their GI. So as long as you're staying within those two, they could be doing post-workout gummy worms after every single bout. As long as they like it, they tolerate it, and their performance is staying up, then by all means, I'd say go for it. Does that answer your question, Blaine? Awesome. A lot of folks get, hopped up on like waxy maize starch or oat starch or potato starch or maltodextrin. Maltodextrin, I'm not a big fan of, just because too much of it tends to cause people some GI upset. Or are we just going to do simple sugar or sucrose, which is glucose and fructose? Any of those can work. Once again, experiment. not just on the type of carbohydrate, but the volume of it, and try to get a feel for how much can your athlete actually do before they're going to have issues with it. Now, one thing to keep in mind, guys, and this is beyond sports performance, now we're talking about more health, which is we want to have relatively normal blood glucose levels. What does that mean? Well, it means resting, we're going to be about 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. Now, after meals, that's going to be a little bit higher. And if you guys get just a basic blood panel, they'll usually have your blood sugar levels. The thing that we're really interested in is what's known as your HbA1c level. And this number is going to correlate to effectively what your average blood sugar has been over the past effective month. Because HbA1c is a protein found in red blood cells. It's expressed in a higher amount when you happen to have had higher blood sugars. So just because you have a good fasting blood sugar, I liken it to your fasting blood sugar is usually done first thing in the morning before you've had a meal. This is not a really good indicator of what someone's blood sugar happens to be throughout the day. Because let's say, yeah, they get up in a normal morning, they'd immediately go and eat a box of donuts. Lunch is 2 liters of Coke, I don't know, French fries, and ice cream. Dinner is some other type of sweets plus, I don't know, mac and cheese and a bunch more carbohydrates. So most of the day, their blood sugar is really, really high. And they're eating candy bars in between each meal. The reason we care about this is high amounts of sugar levels then the sugar will bind to protein. This gets you what's known as glycosylation. So in this example, you glycolate proteins, which is bad for a lot of issues with signaling, inflammation, otherwise throughout your body. But you also create these metabolites that also cause negative effects on the body. Too much sugar effectively. Have any of you guys ever seen how rock candy's made? Or ever tried to make rock candy? So you put a lot of sugar in water. Oh, Cam, good. You want to walk them through how it works?
Yeah, it's like you were starting to say. It's like they just put a lot of sugar in with water, and then they mix like flavoring in with it, and then they kind of heat it up, and then it all kind of just like crystallizes together, and then obviously they cool it down, and then basically just have one big stick of crystallized sugar and water.
Bingo. So when you heat up that sugar, it goes in a solution, and then when you cool it down, especially you add an object with it, which is usually like a stick, yeah, it then crystallizes around it. Well, the problem is those little crystals are forming in your bloodstream, which are actually relatively sharp, and they're cutting the insides of your endothelium and then kind of stabbing their way into other cells of your body. Not a good thing. So hence why you don't want to have super high blood sugar. And then for your ooh factor, because we always got to have at least one of those conversations tonight, do you guys know how doctors used to test to figure out if people had diabetes? Or had the sugar, as it's sometimes referred to? Indeed it does, Abby. Doctors would literally taste their pee to see if it was sweet. If it was sweet, it was an indicator that they had diabetes, because literally the blood sugar levels were so high, it was getting pushed through the kidneys into your urine. And if it's getting to that point, yes, taste their urine. And if it gets to that point, now you're talking about renal damage, because that stuff is punching itself through your very thin and fragile nephrons. The more you know, guys. So now we're going to have you guys break into groups, and we're going to talk our way through carbohydrates. Okay? So the way this works is I'm going to just randomly assign you guys to 4 separate groups. Each group, okay, you guys are group 1 is going to have scenario 1. Group 2, scenario 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. Your goal is to take how many grams of carbohydrate they're doing per day. Then let us know how you would divide it up over their meals over the course of the day. And by all means, give them pre, peri, and post-workout nutrition carbohydrates. So do your best to think about how you'd split up those carbs around those workouts, give us your rationale for it, and then you don't have to worry. You could have fun and say we would have them take in this many grams of potatoes for this meal, but you can instead just say like we'd use low GI carbs for these meals, high GI carbs for these meals, and this many grams of this meal, this many grams of that meal. Does that make sense to everybody as far as the basic goals? Well, thank you, Sam. Okay, cool. Now, the one hint I'll give group 4 is with someone who's looking to lean up for a competition, you nearly want to stack almost all of their carbohydrates, both during and after their workout, as a means to help with muscle recovery and to minimize muscle loss. Now, most all these other athletes, you want to do a good job of relatively evenly dividing it up throughout the day, but obviously making sure that you're still prioritizing and thinking about how many grams you can break down per hour whenever we happen to be doing our workouts. So have fun with it, guys. I'm going to give you guys about 10 minutes. And I'll check in on you guys, see how everybody's doing. And then we'll see what you guys came up with. So are there any questions before I put you guys into your random breakout rooms? All right. Have some fun, guys. Whenever you're ready.
So we had the 500 grams for the bodybuilder. Since he does his hardest workout in the morning, we decided that he should probably have something that is with a high GI right before he works out. And we put like 50 grams.
Mm-hmm.
And then after his workout is when he's going to probably need another high GI. So we did 200 grams there. And the rest of the day, we kind of broke it up to more low GI for the rest of the day. So to kind of keep his blood sugar a little bit more normal. So we did 110 grams before his afternoon workout and 140 after his afternoon workout.
So he doesn't do any carbs with breakfast, lunch, or dinner? Just pre and post workout?
Well, I guess that's what we're thinking about, like with the, like in between his workouts, that would be more his low GI meals.
But you already took up all the carbs for the day. We're done. He doesn't get any more. Abby, you guys did good work. But does that make sense with kind of how we would? I like your idea of doing a decent amount before, because we don't have context on what time morning is. Maybe he's getting up and doing cardio at 6 a.m. Maybe he's doing it at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we can still have a normal breakfast, taking in maybe 100 grams at breakfast, 100 grams at lunch, 100 grams at dinner, and then doing the other, 200 grams pre-post workout, and those focusing more on the high GI carbs, but it's still good organization. Does that make sense to everybody else? And then any other comments from that group? All right, well, group 2. how would you guys set things up for your triathlete?
Okay. So in the morning, we said we would just give them a pack of Pop-Tarts and a Gatorade. So that puts us up to 106 grams right there. And then, like, for that post-workout, we would give them, like, 3 servings of spaghetti, which is another 129. And then we were going to give them pasta salad before their afternoon workout. Like, 3 servings is another 87 grams. And then post workout, they eat 2 potatoes for 76 grams. If those carbs don't break down quick enough, we can just eat less pasta and put maple syrup on the spaghetti and potatoes.
Oh, God. Well, you know what? That's a solution, but dear God, that sounds awful. Just 2 raw potatoes post-workout because cardio is not awful enough by itself?
Oh, no, they can be baked. My bad.
You know, maple syrup on pasta, low key, doesn't sound that bad.
It's Buddy the Elf.
That may just be me. That may just be a me thing, but that doesn't sound terrible.
God. I just wonder if it comes with an insulin syringe. Fair enough. I apologize for yucking your yum. All right, not a bad organization. Not a bad organization. Probably would still want to go a little more carb space throughout the day at meals, and then still having that bracketing of the pre-post workout. So good job, guys. Next up, we got the soccer athlete. How would you want to organize it?
Okay, so we said we would do like a 75 gram of high GI carb breakfast about an hour or so before the first workout. We would do a 50 carb low GI or mid GI lunch around midday, and then a 125 gram of a high GI carb for dinner, which is another couple of hours before practice. After first workout, we want a 25 high GI carb snack. And after the second workout, we said a 25 gram of a low GI carb snack.
Awesome. Not bad, guys. So you can kind of see how that organization, we want to naturally set it up as we're going throughout the day. Still think about, highlighting those carbs a little bit more at the meal, but no, I like that. I like that basic setup. Not bad. And on average, guys, lifting weights can be far less glycogen depleting than the actual playing of soccer. So bracketing more in the afternoon is a good choice. Awesome. Nice job with also pasting that in there for us, Courtney. Thank you. And
I
then,
got them away.
last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about that fitness competitor. How would you go and try to split up those carbs?
So I would say 10 grams of carbs for breakfast, and then another 10 of simple carbs throughout the workout, and then 20 grams of simple carbs after the workout. That's 50.
Mm-hmm.
Then 10 grams of complex carbs in the middle of the day with your lunch, and that's 60. And then 20 and 20. Same thing. Oh no, sorry. 10 grams of simple carbs during your workout, 20 grams of simple carbs after you work out, and then 10 grams of complex carbs before you go to bed.
Okay, not bad. The only little modification I make is honestly just focus on bracketing the workouts with carbohydrates, and specifically getting in more at the end of the cardio, and then especially going pretty much almost doing the 50 grams pre-peri post-workout nutrition for the actual weight training. So you're really supporting that muscle glycogen, but they are really depleted, and maybe no carb or fibrous carbs only at their lunch and their dinner and even their breakfast. So like anything else, guys, you have to experiment with it. You have to figure out what works best for your athletes, but understanding that basic idea of trying to space the carbs out through the day for most athletes, so that way you are helping top off and maintain glycogen levels. And then we're really actively trying to replenish them as quickly as we can post-workout. Any questions through here before we wrap up? No? All right. So make sure you guys are still working on those literature reviews. Obviously, you've got your homework quizzes to stay on top of, your chapter quizzes, and those wonderful homeworks on top of it where you're doing that dietary breakdown. But, make sure you're looking through articles. Is everybody doing okay with finding articles that are specific to, what they're trying to look into for their longer review paper, which is going to be where you're going to look at least at 10 peer-reviewed articles and then write up a synthesis of that information. It's not 10 individual summaries, it's a synthesis of the information. Everybody feel like they got pretty good footing for what they need to do? Well, all right, guys. Well, if nobody's got any questions, everybody go ahead and have yourself a nice night. Good work this evening, guys. Stay safe out there, and I will see you guys next week on Thursday. So stay safe.
Dr. Lyon,
Yeah, what's up?
can I meet with you about the literature review tomorrow?